Morning all. China faced Armenia yesterday, very strong match, and this was the board 2 game, very interesting game, another game of Wang Yue, who's 2-6-8-5. He was playing against Sergei Movsesian of the Armenian team. So let's have a look. Wang Yue playing black. We saw c4 and black replied with c6, interested in transposing into a Slav defense. For the moment, white didn't play d4, he played knight f3, and black responded symmetrically with knight f6. And then we saw knight c3 and then d5. So is white going to commit to playing d4 at some point? Well, actually, he plays e3 here, and potentially that's locking in the bishop. But other than that, it's got some useful ideas, of course. Black here plays a6, which is becoming quite a trendy idea in the Slav defense for a quick b5 sometimes, to ask white what is he doing with this c4 pawn, or sometimes to just gain space if that's ignored. d4 is played here, and now we do see b5. Okay, if white took on d5, I think this would be quite comfortable in this position with c takes d5. It looks like a fairly standard Slav, but with black stretching out on that queen side, and white didn't seem to fancy that type of position. He played actually c5. So he's trying to create maybe a grip on the dark squares here, and this knight is having to defend meekly potentially the c6 pawn. Okay, for the moment black played g6, inviting actually knight e5. So bishop g7, and then we see f4. It looks quite a committal structure, like in a stone wall type position, Dutch stone wall opening. This bishop's kind of locked in, but if black hasn't got an e5 break, where is black's counterplay here? How can black exploit the light square weaknesses? Okay, a5 is played here, which gives the idea that maybe b4 is on the cards later. Bishop e2, and now potentially there's g4, g5. That would be annoying to attack this knight, dislodge this knight. Black reacted with h5 here, prophylaxis against g4, and then white castled. And now bishop f5, which, okay, it's stirring at the light squares, but what is actually the idea? The idea is going to be revealed here very shortly. After bishop f3, black pounces into e4. He doesn't mind an exchange of knights here, or the doubling of pawns. It will give him the d5 square, and this will still leave this bishop kind of embarrassed, kind of locked in. This next move from white also doesn't really do much for this bishop here. Sometimes in a Dutch stone wall position in reverse, this maneuver is going to be useful, but here, okay, let's see. After a4 is played, b4, knight takes e4, giving black the d5 square, but getting white this potentially dangerous diagonal and opportunities here. Black contests c4 immediately with bishop e6, but that leaves, you might ask, e4 a bit vulnerable. Queen c2 now, attacking e4, and that's protected with bishop d5. But again, another kind of weakness of the last move is pounced upon here by white. Perhaps quite ambitiously though, because this bishop is still locked in. If this bishop's locked in, then is this attack on the f file with f5 going to be dangerous? And for the moment, the knight is kind of okay. It can actually go back potentially to c4 if there's a problem with f6 later. but white goes all in with a kind of attack on the king with f5, and his queen's kind of on the queen side. It doesn't seem that relevant for king safety here. So there's an interesting idea played now by black, which is basically to kind of hijack the g file, knowing this bishop's kind of locked in. Black plays bishop takes e5, getting rid of white's dangerous knight, and now g takes f5, not minding h pawn becoming isolated, or this f file dynamism. Just knows, he knows that the bishop's locked in here. It's going to take some time to get into the game if it goes via e1. Rook takes f5, and now leaving h5 and pre here, not bothering with that, and not playing e6, which maybe Sergei had been expecting. Instead we get a very interesting move instead. In fact, e6, there might be rook f6, just ignoring the pawn. Let's actually check this out. This is a critical position. e6 might actually be okay from an engine point of view. Okay, e6, rook f2. It looks as though, again, it looks as though white's pieces are not very nice here. Say queen g5 and that's okay. But let's have a look at the line with rook takes h5. Is this too risky because of queen e1s? Does it lose outright? Rook takes, bishop takes. Is queen h4 dangerous? It's a move, but queen g5 is preferred. If queen h4, bishop can just drop back here, and then it has f1 on queen e1. If we look at queen g5, this looks okay for black as well, but the game continuation is more surprising than e6. It's knight d7. So it has the idea, okay, sack this pawn, and you might think, well, what about, isn't f7 also potentially a problem, especially if black wants to play like e6 to get the queen over like this? Well, we'll see. Bishop takes h5, and okay, black to play. I wonder if you can guess what black played here. Remember, the bishop's protecting the pawn, so these pieces are coordinating, but these pieces are out of the game at the moment. Mind you, the queen is just one move away from queen f2, which might be useful. But in this position, if I give you 10 seconds, guess what black played here, starting from now. Okay, black invited bishop takes f7 check. He played e6, inviting positively bishop f7. Of course, rook f7, you just take this rook. That should be okay. Shouldn't be a problem there. The knight's covering f8. If queen f2, it's not, doesn't seem a major disaster. But bishop takes f7 is played, and we still experience this problem of pieces are not really in the game at the moment. After king e7, the rook has to move somewhere, one assumes anyway, and it does move, stumbling back to f1. Okay, so what has black got here for this sacrificial variation so far? Well, he plays queen c7, and what is there to defend e5? And it looks as though, you know, this h pawn's behind it as well. So it's starting to look a little bit dangerous. If black's collecting this centre pawn, then white's going to be exposed to an attack. White plays here bishop g6, and we see knight takes e5, hitting the bishop again, and offering the e4 pawn. Okay, so can white survive this? He plays bishop takes e4, and must factor in his calculations knight g4 or not even knight f3 if this is dangerous. But a different move is played, not knight g4 or knight f3, which I believe we should just check out briefly. From an attacking point of view, this looks like a dream with the two rooks here blasting against white's king, but it has to be proven that this is sound. Intuitively, there's time at the moment, it seems, when white's pieces are lazing around over here on the queen side, locked out, to do something. Can you guess what black played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds here. Okay, actually there's a number of other tempting moves as well as knight g4, knight f3. Of course there's rook g8, there might even be rook h2, which needs to be calculated as well. There's a wealth of attacking options here really. White is having to look at all this, but in fact black plays a really surprising move, knight d3. So interfering with the queen's protection of the bishop, and immediately threatening like queen h2 as well. So if this is defended, then bishop takes e4. Okay, so which way to take this knight then is probably white's main concern, otherwise he's going to lose that bishop. He takes with the queen, and then we see queen takes h2 check. King's only got one move, and the attack is continued here with rook a f8 check. Two moves to the king. The king chooses king e2, and black casually takes off the f1 rook. After king takes f1, now it has to be played accurately. Black chooses queen g3, and there's immediate threat of mate with check, and queen e1 is not mate actually, but is getting very close. Alternatively, rook f8 is also useful, but let's check this out. Okay, in the game king e2 was played, so the king's making a run for it, but let's just make sure what's going on here. Standard move, say bishop takes d5, a try. It's mate in 4, check, check, and here queen f2, this is mating. So actually not using the queen here but the rook, and then playing queen f2. That's the mate threat that has to be dealt with. So this is probably why the king made a run for it, and it looks as though black's already clearly better anyway. So king e2, rook e1, reintroducing the idea of rook e1 check and queen f2. So that's parried in a radical manner here by white. White finally moves that bishop, lazing around on c1, bishop d2, offering the rook, try and beat off the attack. The rook is taken, and of course black now is the exchange up, and not even for a pawn, it's just pure exchange up, and the attack rages on really here. Queen g4 is for example a menacing threat. With the idea of bishop f3 you can just take. So white decides to play bishop takes d5. Does give him queen h7 check, but it's a bit of a token check it seems. King d8. Horrible threats to deal with now, the exchange down. King d3. Black plays queen g4 here, and there's a mate threat of queen c4 now on the cards. White throws in a check. King d7. And here the king of course can go to c6 if there's another check. The checks just run out quite quickly. White parries queen c4 threat of mate with b3. But now we see queen f5 check. White played cheekily king d4 and resigned with his move. If black wants to, black can mate now with queen e4 mate. Okay. So, on the surface it looks like a total disaster for white. What happened there to Sergei Movsesian, a 2698. He was hacked. We need to look at it again in slow motion, examine what could have led to this disaster. It seems a committal strategy from White, the way he played c5. Generally, this is known as releasing the tension when you play a move like c5. You're releasing the tension on d5, but it's been encouraged by b5 to play c5, and often it looks kind of more justified when black plays b5 to play c5. You're locking out sometimes some black pieces, but here the bishop is not like locked down. More ideal in this scenario of c5 being justified is if there's a bishop here, for example, or not here, you know, locked down on the light squares, and this bishop being victimized. But here it's not the case. So this releasing tension is a little bit controversial. It depends, can black actually prove it's controversial? So by black playing g6, of course there's no need for e6 if this bishop's going to develop. The bishop coming here looks fine and useful, potentially to contest an e5 knight, as the game demonstrated. So without blocking in this bishop, knight e5, bishop g7, and again another committal move, f4. It could be, as we progress through this tournament, that players get more and more tired, and I don't know, so sometimes when players are tired, maybe they become a bit more reckless. But you know, can White justify this structure with the bishop on c1? a5, and okay, White's central control is being undermined of the e4 square with this b4 advance. After bishop e2, the chances with g4, g5 are suppressed with prophylaxis move h5. After castles, now bishop f5 aims for a permanent lockdown on this pawn, which is locking out the bishop. If knight e4 is played and there's a capture, this bishop's going to have to wriggle quite a few moves to get out of this pawn chain. This diagonal is hopeless as well with that pawn on c5. So we see bishop f3 and now knight e4. Okay, and White plays now a4, which doesn't seem to help the cause much after b4. So knight takes e4, d takes. Bishop's really well and truly getting locked down here behind its own pawns, this one and this one. But okay, for the moment, is it really that bad for White, this position already? From an engine point of view, engine likes White a bit. From an engine point of view, maybe he doesn't think there's a big deal about this bishop. Maybe the blunders did occur later. Okay, after bishop e6, queen c2, again we see a favourable position technically from an engine point of view. Bishop d5. Now, okay, so this might actually be a turning point, this f5, because the knight was reinforced heavily. It's attacking g6, ruling out f6. So this move seems, maybe this is a dubious move here. Let's see what the engine thinks of it. At the moment it was plus 0.40, which is about equal or slightly better for White. As we get to like 0.5, we can argue slightly better for White. But f5, yes, it seems as though there's controversy around f5 here. And it looks as though the engine really laps up Black's actual game continuation of bishop takes e5, getting rid of the strong knight, g takes f5, opening up the g file, e6, offering f7, which the engine refuses. So this continuation for Black is heavily favoured here. What Black did, perhaps there's an idea that naturally Black wouldn't want to open the f file or something. If Black plays a move like, instead of bishop e5, g5, I think this is still going to be very nice for white. It's okay, but this looks like a much stronger continuation. Just get rid of white's strongest piece, and then G takes, opening up that line of attack really against white's king, and going for the centre pawn now, putting pressure on that centre pawn. White hasn't got the c3 square because of that pawn, so knight d7 gives the idea that queen c7 and maybe even castle queenside is on the cards. If black is given time, will castle queenside with his king quite safe. You know, what is there to attack the black king over here? So bishop takes h5, and the really surprising move, e6, just offering f7, so double pawn sack, which leaves attacking lines against white's king here, and one pawn's going to be regained pretty soon anyway. This e5 is ripe to drop after queen c7, and the rooks are connected. Black's rooks are actually connected quicker than white's, which is an achievement for black, a major achievement. Bishop g6 actually was threatening, by the way, the lethal rook f7, potentially lethal rook f7, but knight e5 parried, and as well as attacking the bishop, protected f7, offering e4. Now this is the interesting time where could any other moves do, like rook h2, knight g4, even knight f3? Is knight d3, although spectacular, is that the only method? It's actually the best. It's the engine preferred move. The cruncher is knight d3 here, apparently. Rook h2 is also potentially quite good. Very good, in fact. You know, the basic line, there's a double check here. If the king goes out, then it gets mated. But white's best in that situation. Bishop takes d5. C takes. Let's go with what the engine thinks white's best is. e4. It's still better for black, but maybe okay. It looks as though there might be more survival chances here, but it looks still pretty miserable. But at least this bishop sees light of day here. But it's still better for black. But this game continuation is a cruncher, knight d3 here, an absolute cruncher, it seems. Mind you, something else is found, b3, as a slight improvement perhaps in this position. Instead of knight d3, b3. That looks fairly dire for white as well. Where's the queen going to go to keep hold of the bishop? If it goes to b1, oh dear. Now apparently knight f3 check. So it was all winning for black from this point. If g takes, there's queen h2 mate. If rook takes f3, queen h2, queen h4. That's queen e1 mating. So king e2. Don't tell me the queen's getting mated on b1 here. Is that pawn? So it seems b3 was a very, very simple move actually in this position. If white is having to give up the bishop, no, he doesn't. He can threaten queen f6, but then there's rook 8 f8, and again it's controversial to take the bishop here because of queen g7s maybe. But here again, hitting the queen. Now taking here. Now check. So you can see black's continuation in the game is perhaps clearer than all this. But these continuations are good as well. b3, rook h2. Knight f3, does that actually fail? That might actually be better for white. G takes, protecting h2. So you can't get carried away here. Perhaps knight g4. Not that brilliant. Rook f4. You know, it's potentially possible for white to try and defend this, but this accurate move looks like one of the killer blows available to black, and it was actually played during the game. Knight d3. It's guarding f2 against the king's escape, meaning queen h2 is threatening mate, and also of course it's guarding against rook f4 with knight takes f4 being available. So it's putting a spanner in the works here. It's interfering with the queen and bishop. It's doing so much at the same time. It's opening up the queen. It's stopping the king. It's stopping the rook. Spectacular move, knight d3. And then we get this king chase, which is just winning material now because of this threat of rook h1, rook e1, queen f2. So here again, how to defend the e1 square. This embarrassing situation of these queenside pieces is being exposed here. And this pawn, funny enough, if you look at it, is forming part of the mating net. If this pawn wasn't there, the king could have gone to c3, but this pawn's there, so making rook e1 and queen f2, you know, devastating. Let's just remind ourselves of that position. This position here is devastating because this pawn's part of the mating net. So white gives up the rook, and he's just the exchange down, and it's not really that helpful, this position. Defends against queen c4, but it just gets mated quickly anyway. He resigned with his move here, so queen e4 would be the pretty mate in the end. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that one. That was a very, very important game yesterday for the China-Armenia match. And in fact, China overcame Armenia, who are really in the running in this tournament. It's still in the running, of course. There's a few rounds to go. But Wang, this Yue Wang is very dangerous. Heyo Yang drew with Aronian on board 1. Liren Ding drew on board 3 with Vladimir Akopian. Xiangzi Bu drew with Sargassian on board 4. So basically China overcame the very strong Armenian team. 2.5, 1.5. Congratulations to China yesterday. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.